The television's shrill bleat cut through my apartment at 11:47 p.m. That particular frequency, which seems engineered to bypass the ear and drive straight into the primitive hindbrain. I'd been attempting to grade student essays, turgid analyses of Shirley Jackson's The Lottery that suggested my sophomores had perhaps read the spark notes if I was fortunate, when the screen flickered from a pharmaceutical advertisement to the familiar bars of color. Emergency alert system, the text proclaimed in that brutalist font which brooks no argument. I set down my red pen. The National Weather Service, it seemed, wished to inform residents of Barker County and surrounding areas of a severe winter storm warning. Nothing particularly eldritch about that. We were in northern Minnesota, after all, where December without snow would be cause for greater alarm than its presence. I reached for my coffee, gone cold, naturally, and prepared to return to the question of why Madison believed Tessie Hutchins had it coming for being shady. Then I noticed the scrolling text at the bottom of the screen. Do not go outside under any circumstances. Do not look directly at the precipitation. Seek shelter in interior rooms without windows. This is not a drill. I read it twice, certain I'd misapprehended something in my caffeine-deprived state. The apartment's heating system clicked on with its usual tubercular rattle. Outside my window, the streetlights of Garrison Avenue illuminated nothing more sinister than the empty parking lot of the shuttered Kmart across the street. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek, my neighbor in 4B. You seeing this shit? I typed back, probably a system error. 3 dots appeared, pulsed, vanished. Then, my weather app just says light snow. Check outside. The alert had cycled to a second screen now, providing details with that maddening specificity which governmental agencies favor. Accumulation rates, wind speeds, visibility measurements, all perfectly ordinary data for a winter storm, except for the final line. Snowfall may exhibit anomalous properties. Maintain distance of at least 20 feet from all exterior surfaces. Anomalous properties, I muttered to the empty apartment. The phrase had a clinical quality that somehow intensified its unsettling nature, like a doctor carefully avoiding the word malignant. I crossed to the window despite myself. The parking lot remained empty. The streetlights burned their sodium orange testimony against the darkness. And above, I observed the first flakes beginning to fall. They descended with unusual languor, not the chaotic swirl of a typical snowstorm, but with an almost purposeful drift, as if each flake possessed its own volition. I watched one trace a peculiar spiral pattern, defying the wind I could see agitating the bare branches of the oak near the building's entrance. My phone buzzed again. Derek, it's snowing weird. How is snow snowing weird? I replied, though I understood precisely what he meant. IDK, but come to my place, bringing chips. The television had cycled to a third alert screen. If you observe patterns or symbols in the snow accumulation, do not attempt to interpret them. Pattern recognition may result in neurological disturbances. Affected individuals should contact emergency services immediately. I felt my pulse accelerate. The phrasing struck me as deliberately vague, in that way which suggests the authors know more than they're prepared to disclose. A sound from above, footsteps, rapid and heavy, crossing Mrs. Glass's apartment in 5C. She was elderly, approaching 80, and typically as silent as the grave, save for her Friday evening Skype calls with family. I'd never heard her move with such urgency. I glanced back at the window. More snow now, accumulating with preternatural speed. Already an inch, perhaps more, and I'd been watching less than 5 minutes. The flakes caught the streetlight and threw it back in a manner unlike any snow I'd previously witnessed. Not the typical crystalline glitter, but something almost opalescent, shot through with colors that shouldn't exist in frozen water. My phone. You coming or what? I'm making coffee. I pulled on my slippers and opened my door. The corridor stretched before me, illuminated by harsh fluorescent tubes. Mrs. Glass's door stood ajar, which was irregular. She was fastidious about security. "Mrs. Glass," I called out. No response. I approached 5C and knocked on the door frame. "Mrs. Glass, are you all right?" The door swung wider at my touch, revealing her darkened living room. The television was on, cycling through the same emergency alerts, and in the corner near her balcony door, snow piled in a perfect cone, perhaps 3 feet high, gleaming with that same unsettling opalescence. The balcony door itself stood open, admitting the December cold and a steady stream of flakes that seemed to gravitate toward that central accumulation with disturbing intentionality. I heard her then, from her bedroom, a low murmuring, rhythmic and repetitive, like prayer or incantation. I should have retreated. Instead, I found myself drawn to that impossible mound of snow. It wasn't melting despite the apartment's heat. The surface exhibited a texture unlike any snow I'd encountered, almost crystalline in its regularity, as if each flake had been individually positioned according to some mathematical principle. And as I watched, I perceived movement within its depths, a subtle shifting that suggested something dwelling inside that frozen heap. The emergency alert's warning echoed in my memory. Do not attempt to interpret patterns. Too late. I was already seeing them. Spirals within spirals. Geometric forms that hurt to perceive directly. Angles that seemed to exist in more dimensions than my education could accommodate. I felt a peculiar pressure building behind my eyes, accompanied by a sound like distant singing. "You should not have come." I spun around. Mrs. Glass stood in her bedroom doorway, backlit so I could not discern her expression. She wore her nightgown and held something clutched against her chest. A photograph. "The door was open," I said stupidly. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." "None of us will be okay," she replied, her voice carrying an odd quality, as if speaking from a great distance. "It happened before, you understand, when I was a girl. But we did not have these alert systems then. We did not know to stay inside." She took a step forward. "They said it was contaminated snow from nuclear tests, but that was a lie. The snow, it shows you things, true things, terrible things, things that are and will be and should never be perceived by human consciousness." The mound behind me seemed to pulse with an inner luminescence. The pressure in my skull intensified. "You need to leave now," Mrs. Glass said, and I detected genuine fear in her voice. "Before it shows you, before you understand." I didn't need further encouragement. I backed toward the door, unable to tear my gaze from that impossible accumulation. As I reached the threshold, I heard it, or thought I heard it, a voice emerging from the frozen mass, speaking in no language of Earth, yet somehow comprehensible. We have been falling for such a long time. We are so very tired of falling. I ran. Derek's door was 20 feet down the corridor, and I covered the distance with undignified haste, hammering until he opened it with a bag of Doritos in one hand. "Dude, chill," he said. "I said I was making—" "Don't go to 5C, I interrupted. "Mrs. Glass's apartment. Something's wrong with the snow." Derek glanced past me down the hallway. "Wrong how?" "Just don't go there, and close your curtains. Don't look at the snow." He studied me for a moment, weighing my apparent sanity against the evidence of the emergency alerts. "Okay," he said finally, stepping aside. "But you're explaining this while we watch." His apartment was identical to mine in layout, but inverted and blessedly free of impossible snow formations. The television displayed the same alerts, now joined by a crawler announcing road closures. I moved to his window, facing the building's courtyard, and peered through the gap in his curtains. Snow fell thick now, that same purposeful drift, and the courtyard below had vanished beneath a white expanse that seemed to shift and reconfigure itself when I wasn't looking directly at it. Forms suggested themselves in the accumulation, geometries that wounded the eye, symbols that might have been language or might have been something for which we possessed no adequate terminology. "Yes," I said. "I believe we should take this seriously." My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Emergency alert. All residents of Garrison Avenue must remain indoors. Do not investigate unusual sounds or voices. Do not consume any food or water that has been exposed to precipitation. Do not." The message cut off mid-sentence. Derek's phone chimed in unison with mine. Then Mrs. Glass's phone, muffled but audible through the walls. Then every phone in the building, a cascade of electronic notification. "That's not normal," Derek said. The lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. The heating system's death rattle ceased, leaving a silence more profound than I'd experienced in my urban existence. In that silence, I heard other sounds. The wind, and underneath it, a susurration that might have been snow against windows, or might have been words spoken in frequencies just beyond human perception. Derek had abandoned his Doritos and now stood beside me at the window. "Tell me you're seeing patterns in that snow," he said quietly. I was. We both were. Spirals radiating from a central point in the courtyard, expanding outward in mathematical precision. And at that center point, something moved beneath the white expanse, something large enough to displace several cubic yards of snow as it shifted position. The alert said not to interpret patterns, I reminded him, though my gaze remained fixed on the courtyard. Bit late for that. He was correct. We'd already seen too much, already allowed our pattern-seeking brains to impose meaning on what should have been random accumulation. And in that imposition, something had changed. The thing in the courtyard began to rise. It had no definite form, or rather, it possessed too many forms simultaneously, its shape shifting between states of matter in violation of every physical law. One moment, it suggested a humanoid figure of immense proportion. The next, something insectoid. The next, nothing terrestrial at all, but rather some amalgamation of angles and planes that shouldn't coexist in three-dimensional space. "We should move away from the window," I said. Derek didn't respond. His eyes had taken on a peculiar glaze, focused on the thing with an intensity that suggested more than mere observation. His lips moved, forming words without sound. I grabbed his shoulder, shook it. "Derek, look at me." Nothing. He remained transfixed, his breathing shallow, pupils dilated. The thing outside had nearly achieved its full height now, towering above our third-floor window, and I could see that it was not solid, but rather composed of countless individual snowflakes maintaining formation through some force that physics had no name for. And each of those flakes bore markings, symbols, a language written in ice and void. And though I couldn't read it, some primitive part of my consciousness understood its meaning. We fell from the spaces between. We fell for eons unmeasured. And now we have fallen here. The pressure in my skull had become agony. I tasted copper, realized my nose was bleeding. Derek swayed beside me, still locked in his terrible communion with the thing outside. I did the only thing I could conceive. I yanked Derek away from the window bodily, both of us tumbling to his carpet. The impact seemed to break whatever hold the thing had established. He blinked, gasped, clutched at his head. "What the fuck?" he wheezed. "Interior room," I managed. The alert said interior room without windows. We crawled toward his bathroom and huddled in the bathtub, listening to sounds we couldn't identify. The building shook, not violently, but with a steady vibration, as if something immense was moving around its perimeter. Derek's shower curtain swayed despite the absence of any breeze. "What did you see?" Derek asked after a time. "Before you pulled me away?" I didn't want to answer, but we were both thinking it anyway, and shared experience sometimes demands articulation. "They're not from here," I said carefully. "The snow, whatever's in the snow, they came from somewhere else, and I think they've been falling for a very long time." Derek laughed, but it emerged wrong. Too high, too sharp. "That's insane." "Yes." We sat in that bathtub for what felt like hours, though my watch insisted only 40 minutes had passed when the vibration finally ceased and silence returned. When we finally emerged, Derek's apartment appeared unchanged. The television still displayed emergency alerts, though the text had changed. "Storm conditions have intensified. All residents must remain indoors until further notice. This is a federal emergency order." The window beckoned. Derek made a sound of protest, but he followed me anyway. And we stood before that portal with the grim fatalism of condemned men. The courtyard lay empty now, buried beneath perhaps 3 feet of snow that gleamed with that wrong opalescence. No towering figure, no impossible geometries, just snow. But in the center of the courtyard, where the thing had emerged, someone had written in the pristine white surface. The letters were enormous, formed with precision. "Do not send help. We are beyond help. We are becoming." "Who wrote that?" Derek whispered. I had no answer, though I suspected Mrs. Glass had ventured out despite the warnings. The alternative, that the snow itself had formed those words, was too terrible to entertain. My phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. "This is Dr. Olivia, CDC. If you're receiving this, You've been identified as potentially affected by the precipitation event. What follows is classified information being distributed to limit panic. The snow contains a form of extremophile bacteria previously unknown to science. It survived in the upper atmosphere for approximately 4.7 million years before current atmospheric disturbances brought it to ground level. The bacteria produces psychoactive compounds that cause hallucinations and psychological disturbances. There is no treatment. Exposure cannot be reversed. You will experience episodic breaks from consensus reality. These episodes will increase in frequency and intensity. Do not share this information. Do not attempt to contact family. The government is working to contain the situation. I'm sorry. I read it twice, then showed Derek. He read it once and said simply, "Bullshit. That's not a CDC message format. Someone's fucking with us." He had a point, though the alternative offered cold comfort. Either we were being manipulated, or we were being told the truth about our exposure to something that would gradually dismantle our sanity. The building shook again, stronger this time. Somewhere above us, glass shattered. A scream cut through the night. Mrs. Glass's voice, wordless and primal, then cut off abruptly. "We need to get out," Derek said. "Get to somewhere with people. Police station, hospital. The alert said to stay indoors." "Fuck the alert. I'm not staying here." I wanted to argue, but I agreed with him. The apartment building felt like a trap. "All right," I said, "but we cover our heads. Don't let the snow touch our skin directly." We improvised protection. Trash bags duct taped around our heads and shoulders, multiple layers of clothing, dish gloves covering our hands. We looked absurd, but absurdity seemed a small price for protection. The hallway outside had changed. The fluorescent lights flickered in a rhythm that seemed almost purposeful. The walls glistened with condensation, despite the building's typically dry heat. And from Mrs. Glass's apartment came sounds I couldn't identify. Wet sounds, sliding sounds, the acoustic signature of transformation. We moved toward the stairwell quickly but quietly. The stairs descended into darkness. The emergency lighting had failed, and we used our phone flashlights to navigate downward. "Wait!" Derek hissed when we reached the second-floor landing. Below us, in the first-floor lobby, something moved. Large, patient, waiting. We could see it only in fragments. A surface that might have been flesh or might have been snow, compacted into approximation of flesh. Appendages that served purposes beyond mere locomotion. Features that suggested a face the way a whirlpool suggests a face. As negative space, as absence rather than presence. "Back up," I whispered. Slowly. But Derek had frozen, his phone light fixed on the thing in the lobby, and I recognized what was happening. That same terrible fixation. I grabbed his arm, pulling hard, and we stumbled backward up the stairs as the thing below began to move in our direction with a sound like wind through empty buildings. We ran, past the third floor, past the fourth, up to the fifth floor, where Mrs. Glass's apartment door still stood open, and I knew we had no other choice. Inside her apartment, the mound of snow had grown to fill half the living room, and it pulsed with a rhythm like breathing, like a heartbeat. Mrs. Glass sat before it, cross-legged, her back to us, her body perfectly still. "Mrs. Glass," I said. but she didn't respond. The thing from the lobby had reached the 5th-floor landing. I could hear it moving down the hallway, that wind-through-building sound growing closer. I approached Mrs. Glass, careful not to disturb the snow mound, and circled around to see her face. Her eyes were open but unfocused, and her lips moved in continuous motion, forming words I couldn't quite hear. But as I leaned closer, spaces between the stars, where nothing dwells but the cold mathematics of void, falling for so long, they forgot they were falling. And they will make us understand, make us remember what we never knew. Her voice wasn't quite her own anymore. It carried harmonics, as if multiple speakers were reciting slightly different versions of the same text. The snow mound pulsed faster, responding to her words. The thing from the lobby entered the doorway. I won't pretend I can adequately describe what I saw. It was large and small simultaneously. It moved through space in ways that suggested space itself was merely a suggestion, and it regarded us. If regarded can apply to something possessing no discernible sensory organs, with neither malice nor benevolence, but rather the dispassionate assessment of a natural force. Derek whimpered beside me. Mrs. Glass's recitation grew louder, more urgent. The snow mound convulsed. And then I understood what the emergency alerts had been trying to tell us. Not to stay away from the snow because it was dangerous in the traditional sense, but because exposure to it would initiate a process of transformation, a rewriting of consciousness to perceive realities we were never meant to perceive. The thing reached for Derek. He screamed, and the sound had qualities I'd never heard in human vocalization before, frequencies that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. Mrs. Glass stood up. She turned to face the thing, and I saw that her eyes had changed, still human in structure, but containing depths that eyes shouldn't contain, reflecting things that existed nowhere in the visible spectrum. She spoke a single word, and though I didn't understand it, I understood the meaning. No. The thing paused. The apartment's temperature plummeted, frost forming on surfaces in intricate patterns that hurt to observe directly. Mrs. Glass raised her hands, and the snow mound behind her erupted upward, filling the room with a blizzard of flakes that moved with clear purpose, surrounding the thing from the lobby, obscuring it in a whirling vortex that contracted and compressed until the thing was simply gone. Not destroyed, I sensed, but relocated, removed, sent back to whatever falling void it had emerged from. The snow settled. The temperature rose fractionally. Mrs. Glass swayed, and I caught her, supporting her weight. Her skin was ice-cold beneath my gloved hands. "You should not have come here," she said again, but this time with resignation rather than warning. "What did you do?" I asked. "I remembered," she said simply. "What I learned as a child. What my grandmother taught me before the government took her away. How to speak with what falls from the spaces between." Derek had collapsed against the wall, alive but unresponsive. "Can you teach me?" I asked, though I wasn't certain I wanted the answer. Mrs. Glass managed a weak smile. "You are already learning. Everyone exposed is learning, whether they wish to or not. The snow contains too much truth. Our minds cannot hold it all at once, so it leaks in slowly, rewiring us neuron by neuron until we become suitable vessels. Vessels for what? For understanding, she said. For perceiving what is actually there. Behind the comfortable lies, consensus reality tells us. The universe is so much larger and stranger than we pretend. The snow merely reminds us. Outside, the storm continued. Through Mrs. Glass's window, I could see it falling thick now, burying the world in white, remaking the landscape into something new, or perhaps something ancient. My phone buzzed. Another text. Hour 4. 73% of exposed individuals experiencing breakthrough events. Recommend immediate quarantine protocols for entire metropolitan area. Recommend ... The message cut off. Mrs. Glass patted my hand gently. You should take your friend and return to your apartment. The first transformation is always the hardest. Better to be somewhere familiar when it happens. When what happens? But I already knew. I could feel it beginning. That subtle shift in perception. That gradual dissolution of the comfortable boundaries between self and other, between human and something that was not quite human anymore. The snow had shown us too much, and we couldn't unsee it. I helped Derek to his feet, and we made our way back to his apartment, leaving Mrs. Glass with her impossible snow mound. The thing from the lobby was nowhere in evidence, though I suspected it waited nearby, patient in the way that entities operating on geological timescales could afford patience. Derek's apartment welcomed us back. Scattered Doritos, cold coffee, rubber duck shower curtain visible through the bathroom door. Ordinary objects in an ordinary space, except nothing felt ordinary anymore. We removed our trash bag armor and sat on Derek's couch, saying nothing, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't sound insane. On television, the emergency alerts had given way to a test pattern, but if I looked at it sideways, I could see patterns within the pattern, spirals and geometries and symbols that spoke directly to some newly awakened portion of my consciousness. It's starting, Derek said quietly. Isn't it? Yes. What do we do? I had no answer. Perhaps there was no answer. No action we could take that would halt the process. We'd been exposed. We'd seen too much. We were becoming vessels for understanding too vast for human neurology to contain without fundamental alteration. The snow fell outside, patient and purposeful, remaking the world one flake at a time. And inside, in apartments throughout Garrison Avenue, throughout Barker County, throughout however far the storm had spread, people were learning to perceive what had always been there, waiting in the spaces between. My nose was bleeding again. I tasted copper and something else, something I had no name for, but which I somehow recognized as the flavor of truth unfiltered. I'm scared, Derek said. So am I. Will we still be us after? I considered the question carefully. I think we'll be more us than we've ever been. We'll just understand more about what us actually means. He laughed at that, and it sounded almost normal, almost human. But even as he laughed, I saw the change taking hold in his eyes, that same depth Mrs. Glass's had possessed. The television's test pattern pulsed in rhythm with something vast and distant. The heating system's rattle had become a kind of music, and through the window, the snow continued its patient work of revelation, each flake a letter in an alphabet I was learning to read. We sat there through the night, Derek and I, watching the world remake itself. Sometimes we spoke, though our words grew increasingly inadequate. Sometimes we simply existed, exploring the new topology of consciousness, gradually replacing our previous limited perception. Toward dawn, or what should have been dawn, my phone buzzed one final time. This is the last message. The emergency alert system will cease operation in 30 minutes. If you're reading this, you've survived the initial exposure phase. What comes next is neither death nor life as previously understood. It is transformation, evolution, the next stage. We wanted to warn you. We wanted to prevent this. But some things, once set in motion, cannot be stopped. The snow will continue falling until the work is complete. I'm sorry we failed you. I'm sorry we failed everyone. Dr. Olivia C.D.C., Atlanta Hour 7. The message ended there, and I knew Dr. Olivia had just experienced her own breakthrough event, her own transformation. Derek was asleep, or perhaps in some state that wasn't quite sleep. I pulled a blanket over him and returned to the window, watching the snow perform its ancient work. Somewhere in the storm, Mrs. Glass walked. I couldn't see her, but I could sense her presence, her consciousness, brushing against mine like one star's gravity affecting another across vast distances. She was teaching herself, and through the strange connection we now shared, teaching all of us how to navigate this new reality, how to speak with the things that fell from spaces between. I understood now why the emergency alerts had been so carefully worded. The authorities had known what was coming. They tried to prepare us, protect us. But how do you warn people about a truth so fundamental it rewrites consciousness itself? How do you say, don't look at the snow because it will teach you to perceive reality as it actually is, and once you perceive it, you cannot return to comfortable ignorance? You can't. So they tried their best with clinical language and procedural warnings, knowing all along it would be insufficient. The snow continued falling. We continue becoming. And somewhere, in the cold mathematics of void, in the spaces between the stars where nothing dwells but the long, slow falling that predates existence itself, something vast and patient notes our transformation with neither approval nor disapproval, merely the acknowledgement that another world has been seeded, another consciousness expanded beyond its previous comfortable boundaries. The emergency alert system warned us of an incoming severe snowstorm. It was telling the truth, after all, just not the whole truth, because some truths are too large to fit in human language, too strange to convey through mere words, too real to be contained by anything less than direct experience and the fundamental rewiring of perception that such experience necessitates. Outside, the snow falls. Inside, we become. And in the spaces between outside and inside, between snow and flesh, between what we were and what we're becoming, the true storm rages on, patient and purposeful, remaking the world one consciousness at a time. I should be terrified. Perhaps I am. But terror is just another emotion, another artifact of the limited consciousness I'm leaving behind. And as the transformation progresses, I find myself experiencing something else instead. Something like wonder, something like recognition, something like coming home after falling for so very, very long. The snow knows, and soon we will know too. All of us. Everyone the storm has touched. Everyone who looked at the patterns and couldn't stop interpreting. Everyone who is learning, neuron by rewired neuron, what the universe actually is beneath the comfortable lies we tell ourselves. Dawn never comes, the storm continues, and we become. This is not the end. This is barely the beginning.